So now that we have our calculators squared away and we've been introduced to the SOHCAHTOA ratios, we're ready to move on to solving triangles, both sides, angles, and then the whole triangle. So I start out always with these ones in labeling the triangle. Doesn't matter what I'm doing with it, I label it up. I always start with the hypotenuse, but label the sides that I care about. Once I've labeled the sides that I care about or have or looking for, I decide on the trig ratio. So SOHCAHTOA. Do I want the sine ratio, the cosine ratio, or the tangent ratio? Which one's relevant to the triangle that I'm working with? I'm going to sub in what I know, and then I'm going to solve. This is really a whole bunch of calculator skills. I'm going to show my work, but a lot of it does get done on your calculator. So hopefully we've got those calculator skills squared away. So here we have 4 triangles to start with. The A, when I take a look at this, I've got my target angle here. 25 is my hypotenuse, and A is my opposite. There is another side, there is the adjacent side, but I don't tend to label it because this helps limit my choices of which ratio I'm dealing with. Because I have opposite and hypotenuse, that tells me that the sine of an angle is equal to opposite over hypotenuse is the ratio that's going to be relevant to this triangle. What I'm going to try and do is solve for side A here. Always with sides, we're going to go to the nearest tenth or 1 decimal place of a centimeter or a meter or whatever. The angles are always going to be to the nearest degree. So now that I've labeled my triangle, I've picked my ratio, I'm going to sub in what I know. So I know that sine, and again the angle is 55, remember that's what theta is representing, is opposite, which is A, that's my unknown, over my hypotenuse, which in this case is 25.0. In doing this, I want to get A all by itself. I can think of this a number of different ways. I could multiply both sides by 25 to clear my fractions, or I can think of it as a ratio and proportion and do the cross product or cross multiply to get A by itself. Whichever way you think about it, I would get A would equal the sine 55 times 25. And this gives me something that's solid as far as my algebra goes, but also something I can put into my calculator. So once I get this line, this is what I'm putting into my calculator. So when I put into my calculator, I'd hit sine 55 times 25. And what you should get is the length of side A. We're going to round this to the nearest decimal place, 1 decimal place, and I get 0.5 centimeters. All right, let's try a few more. I always go about these ones in the same way. I figure out what I've got and what I'm looking for. I'm going to choose the correct ratio, and I start at this point writing out that ratio because it saves me making some mistakes sometimes. So I've got my ratio squared away. Now I can sub in what I know about this triangle. So adjacent is my A, and my hypotenuse is 13. Again, you could think of cross multiplying or clearing your denominator. Either way, we'd get A is equal to cos 25 times that 13, or 13 times the cos 25 gets the same place. So A in this triangle ends up being 11.8 centimeters as we round to 1 decimal place. Keep going. I always label my triangles. Decide on my trig ratio. Sub in what I know. Make it so it's something I can put into my calculator. And then do that work on my calculator. So tan 30 times 15.5, rounding that to 1 decimal place, I get 8.9 centimeters on my calculator. Last one on this page, we've got 30. A is adjacent to that 30. 40 is my hypotenuse. I went against what I usually do, usually labeling the hypotenuse first, but whatever. That gives me cosine. is the relevant ratio because I've got my adjacent and my hypotenuse. So now I sub in what I know. And then I give myself something I can put into my calculator. If you've done this before, you might find that you're skipping some steps already. You might find that you're not writing out the ratio. You might also find that you're not writing this out. You're just putting it into your calculator. If you don't show all your work, that's absolutely fine. I do think that the labeling the triangle sets you up so that you don't make a careless error. And I also think that subbing in again, catches you if you're going to make a careless error. So on this one, my calculator tells me is 34.6 centimeters, that side that I'm trying to solve for. Next ones, I'll show all my work. You might be ready to go out on your own. Just a heads up, if you're working ahead or tempted to pause or fast forward the video, F has a bit of something funky in it. Okay. Once I've got it labeled, I know that it's going to be which ratio I'm dealing with. So that's tangent of 15 is A over 10. A would actually equal tan 15 times 10 to get A all by itself. On my calculator, I can solve that A equals 2.7 centimeters. All right, just when we get things going on this one, I'm going to go about this the same way. I'm dealing with the tangent of my angle is opposite over adjacent. Subbing in what I know, it's tangent of 60 is opposite, which is 15.6 over A. This one is different. All of a sudden, our unknown is down below. So we need to slow things up a little bit in that we need to clear up our algebra. So you could think of it as the cross product. You could think of it as clearing denominators. You could also know that there is a bit of a shortcut. So the shortcut is to swap and divide. If you remember the shortcut, don't listen to the next 30 seconds of what I say. The algebra and showing you how to get there, I would clear my denominator, multiplying by A on both sides. And then I would have to divide both sides by tangent of 60. So if you can follow where I'm at, I would now have that A equals 15.6 divided by the tangent of 60. If you remember what I said, it was swap and divide. So now that we have this, I can put that into my calculator, and it is a little different. Your calculator should work the same for you because you're putting in 15.6 divided by tangent 60. Make sure you hit equals. Again, everybody's programming is just a little different. You should end up with 9.0 centimeters. Moving on, we've got a little more practice on these ones. So G, labeling it up. Deciding on my trig ratio. Subbing in what I know. Again, we have the unknown in the denominator. What I think is maybe easier than the scribbling that I switched to purple pen for is to swap and divide. So what I'm saying is I swap the 30, is a tan 30 and the A. So A would equal 8 divided by tan 30. Putting down what you put into your calculator, I think is a useful step for us. So on my calculator, I get that A is equal to 13.9 centimeters. One last one, we got our angle, we've got our hypotenuse, we've got adjacent, so this means that it's going to be the cosine ratio that I'm dealing with. Subbing in what I know, it's cosine of 17. I've got 91, and again, one more time, I've got my unknown in the denominator. So I like thinking the swap and divide. That gives me something that I can put into my calculator, and A then is 95.2 centimeters. Okay, so those are the skills for solving for a missing side. The next thing we're going to do is use our calculator in the other way. We're going to use the same SOHCAHTOA ratios to solve for a missing angle. In going about these ones, I keep it as much the same as I did before. So I'm going to label the triangle. I'll switch back to a different color here. Label the triangle, decide on your ratio, sub in what you know, and then solve. Remembering to hit the second function button, right? It's the inverse ratio to solve for that angle. So with this one, I would have the hypotenuse, and oh, I'm solving for G. That's my target. I had to read the instructions there. This one would be adjacent to it. So that tells me that its cosine of theta is adjacent over hypotenuse. I've chosen my ratio. I'm going to sub in what I know. This time I don't know my angle. I'm going to put in G because that's what the angle is that I'm looking for. Adjacent is 3 and hypotenuse is 7. We've practiced using your calculators exactly like this. Technically what you're doing is that G is equal to the cosine -1 of 3 over 7. But you don't need to know that. What you need to remember is to hit the second function button. So G should come out rounding to the nearest degree because that's the way we're always going to do this unit. Sides are to 1 decimal places and angles are to the nearest degree. We get 65 degrees. All right, we got a few more to do on these. I'm going to keep showing all of the work. D is my target angle here. So we've got opposite and adjacent. This tells me that it's the tangent ratio. Subbing in what I know, its tangent of angle D is 3 over 4. D on my calculator, I don't show any other work typically, would be 37 degrees. The next one down, I'm solving for B. 15 would be opposite to that one, and 20 is my hypotenuse. That means that I'm dealing with the sine ratio. I'm going to be bold and skip writing out the sine ratio. I'm going to sub into the sine ratio. The sine ratio is opposite over hypotenuse, so that would be 15 over 20. If you want, you can keep writing out the whole equation, but I think oftentimes we are a bit tired and trying to get through this as efficiently as possible, and sometimes it is, okay to start taking those shortcuts. The next one, I'd label it up. I often don't shortcut on that one because if I do, I make a mistake. That means that I'm dealing with the cosine ratio because I've got the adjacent and the hypotenuse. Subbing into that cosine ratio, it would be 17.3 over the 30. Using my calculator, remembering how to pop out the missing angle, I get 55 degrees. Next one's down. We're looking for a C on this one. Big triangle. Don't know what those units are. And up with C being 41 degrees. These ones are a little bit quicker. There's also not options in how you have to solve these. So, your unknown is always out and you get to it using that second function, the inverse trig function. So it doesn't have the same wrinkle algebraically as the missing sides. What's my answer on this one? F is equal to 69 degrees. Okay, last two before we roll it all together. On these ones, I'll go for it. I've got my angle, I've got opposite and adjacent. It's tangent of angle X would equal 13 over 19, and x equals 34 degrees. Last one, I've got my hypotenuse, I've got the adjacent, so that means that cosine of question mark is equal to 4.85 over 6.02, whatever the units those are in. That means that question mark, or my angle, is 36 degrees. Okay, so rolling it all together, solving triangles, you now have a number of skills. And honestly, in these ones, I'm going to show us a couple of them, but then I'm also just going to put the answers up because there are options in how you get to the answers. One piece of information that we have about right angle triangles, or technically all triangles, is that the angles all add up to 180 degrees. The other tool that we have is Pythagorean theorem. So this one's all about angles. This one's all about sides. The three trig ratios, the SOHCAHTOA, are what unites the sides and angles. So if you don't have all angles or you don't have all sides, you have two other pieces of information, you can solve the triangle. And so there's lots of choose your own adventure on these. I really do think that the first thing to do always in these triangles is to label them up. And so we've got an unknown triangle here. I'm going to call it A, B, and C. I'm just going to scroll to give myself a little bit more space. I would know that this side is side C, A is equal to 9, and B is over here. I've got one angle given to me, and so that one is often useful to use as your target angle. I'm going to start with the easiest thing possible. Angle A would be equal to 90 minus 50. No fancy calculator work, well, maybe you use your calculator, but we get that angle A is 40 degrees. We now have one piece of our triangle solved. So I'm going to add that to my triangle, but I put it in a different color because that's a number that I wasn't given, but I could use it if I wanted to. So sometimes if you make a mistake, then you're just going to perpetuate that mistake as you move on in the triangle. So the next thing we want to do is solve for either side B or side C. So in doing this, I'm actually going to use trig. So I've got my target angle here. I've got adjacent to that. I'm going to try and solve for my opposite angle. So in solving for side B, that's the next thing I'm going to do. I'm going to say that we have tangent of my 50 is equal to B over 9, right? So now that I have this, I could write that B is equal to tangent 50 times 9. On my calculator, B is then equal to 10.7, whatever the units are. So I've now solved one more piece of my information. So B would be 10.7. I put it in a different color. Ultimately, the last piece of information is what C is equal to. So you could use the cosine ratio because you know your adjacent and you're looking for your hypotenuse. Just to show all of the skills that we have, I'm going to solve for side B or solve C using Pythagorean. So C squared would equal 10.7 squared plus 9 squared. C is actually going to equal the square root of the sum of those two sides. So that gets rid of the squared. And again, I can use my calculator to tell me that C is equal to 14.0. And so now I've actually solved for all of the parts of this triangle. I've got 3 angles and 3 sides all worked out. You can use any number of skills in whatever order you choose. So I'm going to do 2 more for you, and then I'm just going to put up the answer keys to these ones. So we've got 2 here. They're already labeled for me. This would be side B, side A we don't know, and side C we don't know. The easiest way to do this, first off, is to take 90 minus 62 to solve for angle A. angle A is equal to 28 degrees. If you want, you can label that on your triangle. You don't have to. Sometimes it just keeps you squared away on what you're doing and what you could be using. The next thing I could do is solve for either side A or side C. I'm going to use this as my reference angle or my target angle. This would be opposite to that, and this would be adjacent. So when I do that, I have my tangent ratio. So tangent of 62 would equal my opposite, which is 22.6 over A. In this one, I'd have to remember to swap and divide. A would equal 22.6 divided by tangent 62. And A on my calculator is equal to 12.0. The last one, just to round things out and show you all the skills, you could use SOHCAHTOA again, and that would be absolutely fine. This time you'd be solving for your, what is it? Oh, you know what? I just did that backwards. Oh no, that's right. You'd be solving for your hypotenuse. Oh, I thought I made a mistake. Okay, so the last one is solving for side C. So C is going to equal this A, 12.0 squared, plus 22.6 squared, and we take the square root of that. So that's Pythagorean. That's what I would put in my calculator, and C would equal 25.6. And so this is the last piece of information. I'd have everything on my triangle. I forgot to do 12 as I went. That might have helped me. And my triangle is now solved. One more, and then I'm going to just switch to the answer key because you can choose your own adventure in this. I always start with labeling as much as I can and then doing the easiest thing. So in this one, angle B is 90 minus 51, or angle B is 39 degrees. The next thing that I do is solve for side B. So this would be side B. If I have that one, that would be adjacent to my reference or target angle here. So I'd have tan of 51 is equal to 9 over B. And B, swapping and dividing, I didn't write, oh, I will write it out, 9 over tan 51. Side B is equal to 7.3, we finally have units again, inches. Last piece, I used Pythagorean theorem on this one. I'm looking for side C. So C is equal to square root of 9 squared plus 7.3 squared. And C would equal 11.6 inches. Take your time with these. I think it's something you just need to iron out for yourself. I'm going to switch to my answer key. I tried to show most of my work as we went through these. I could show more, but I tend to do it on my calculator. And you can also make other choices. If your answers are close, but off just slightly, that could be due to rounding as you go. So here's the bottom two on page 8. Moving on to the next two, top of page 9. And I know this is going to take a minute, but the last one's on the page here. So give that a go. If you're running into troubles, it's usually better to slow things down, label your triangles, show maybe a little more work.